Hey guys, I am back to continue our discussion of the structure of verb phrases, and the type of verb phrase that we have talked about so far is the monotransitive. So, Fred hit the wall. You've got your subject, Fred, you've got your verb, hit, and you've got your direct object, the wall. How do you know that the direct object is the wall? Because the wall is receiving the action from the verb. So we know that the direct object will always be receiving the action from the verb. That is something that you can use to check to make sure that you have a monotransitive structure. And we mentioned that in English it's very common to have monotransitive structures. We find them everywhere. However, this course would be so boring if we only had monotransitive verb phrases. And how boring English would be if we didn't have any other way of expressing the verb phrase, right? No fun whatsoever. So in fact, I have good news. Monotransitives are not all there is. We also have intransitives. So that's going to be our second group. Intransitive verb phrase. Intransitives are examples like the phone rang. The phone rang. When you think about what is this sentence about, what's the topic of the sentence? It's about the phone. So the phone is the subject of the sentence. And then when we think about what is the rest of that sentence doing, rang, well, rang is telling us what the phone did. So rang is describing the subject of the sentence, is telling us the action that occurred. So we would say that that sentence, the phone rang, is a good type of intransitive. In other words, when you have an intransitive verb phrase, you have just the verb. There's no direct object. So when you say the phone rang Bill or something like that, that's going to sound weird because ring isn't the type of verb that can take a direct object. It's the type of verb that prefers to be on its own. It has its own complete meaning just in the verb itself. So with intransitives, you can think of the intransitives as being the simplest. It's just the main verb itself. And you will always have that because we know every single sentence in English is going to be comprised of a subject and a predicate. The predicate is always the verb phrase. The verb phrase always contains at least one verb in English. So if you have two words in a sentence in English, you already know what must be going on. The first one must be the subject. The second one must be the predicate. And the first one is what the sentence is about. The second one is telling you some action that happened to the first one or that the first one did. And so that's going to be the main verb of the sentence. That's going to be an intransitive sentence. It's the simplest form of a sentence. So let's look at a couple of more examples of the intransitive types. So you have, for example, Mary died. Okay, so when you say Mary died, it wouldn't work to say Mary died the flu or something like that. You can't have anything occurring after the verb died. It just doesn't sound like an English sentence, right? So for that reason, this is going to be a typical example of the intransitive verb phrase. The only thing we see there is just the main verb. So another example would be things like the flowers grew. When you say the flowers grew, it doesn't mean that there's a direct object there that is missing. It just means that you have an intransitive construction. So the flowers grew is a complete sentence on its own. It's comprised of the subject, the flowers, what the sentence is about, and then just the verb grew, which is an intransitive verb phrase. So even though the verb occurs just by itself in a sentence like that, it's still the predicate of the sentence, it's still the verb phrase of the sentence. So whenever you see a single verb alone in a sentence, you can know 100% it must be intransitive, because that's the only verb phrase type that doesn't require you to have something following it. Okay? Another example would be Sam celebrated. So the subject of your sentence is going to be Sam. It's who we're talking about. And then what are we saying about Sam? We're saying that he celebrated. That's the action that we're using. We know this is the main verb because we've got the past tense marker here, the ed, that tells us that this occurred in the past. And then you have an expression like the bomb exploded. In this sentence, the subject is the bomb. It's occurring first. It's a noun phrase. It has a determiner the and a noun bomb. And then we have that followed by exploded. Exploded is telling you the action of the sentence. So this is the predicate of the sentence. Since it's the only verb that occurs in this sentence, it is the whole verb phrase. It's the predicate, it's the verb phrase. Therefore, you know it's intransitive. If you always have one unit, if you only have one unit in the verb phrase, then it's always going to be intransitive. Okay? So, another example of an intransitive would be something like the birds sang. The birds sang. You don't need to have anything else following it. You understand that it just means that the birds were engaged in the action of singing. So you know that the birds is going to be the subject of the sentence, and you know that sang, being the only other element in the sentence, has got to be the predicate, has therefore got to be the verb phrase, has therefore got to be comprised of a verb, which of course it is, because we know that we can see, for example, past tense there. The verbs sang yesterday. You wouldn't say the verb sang tomorrow, because you have a clash in the meaning there. So whenever you have tense markers, you know you have a verb, and as you have a sentence that is comprised of just a subject and a predicate, you know 100% that that's intransitive. So this is probably the second most common type of sentence that you'll find in English if you look through novels and you know think about conversations that you have. These are very, very common. They're not as common as the monotransitive. The monotransitive are definitely by far the most common, but after that is probably the intransitive.